Over the weekend, we got previews for the next Magic set. Not the one in June. That's Final Fantasy that we got previews for last week. This week, weekend, we got previews for Tarkir, which is coming in about a month's time. We're going to look at the initial previews and talk about some first impressions. And if you want to buy any of the stuff you see in this video by pre-ordering or anything Magic related, single or sealed product, you can do in North America at coolstuffinc.com. Use code Kenobi at checkout to get 5% off your order, and it helps to support the show. Meanwhile, if you're in the old world of Europe itself, you can go to magicmadhouse.co.uk. They sell Magic the Gathering, Warhammer, and all your trading card needs. Use the code on screen now to get 5% off your order, and it helps support the show. Let's jump into it. I'll be covering the Commander cards that were shown during a live playing of Commander at home, but let's do the the main set stuff first. Narset, I've already done a little video on because she showed up on Friday, so I got that finished over the weekend. So if you want to see that, I'll link that in the description below. Basically, she's a Storm Commander, benefits from plot. It's interesting space for a Storm Commander, I guess. Next up, we have Baronstorm Siege, a 4-mana enchantment that calls back to the original sieges of the Khan's block. These sieges were depictions of battles where you picked your clan alliance, or in the case of the original ones, you picked whether you're on the dragon side or the human side in the conflict. This time around, it's inter-clan war with Abzan versus Mardu. There is some contention and some frustrations around how Tarkir is being positioned in terms of like in-canon and storyline. The Dragon Lords are gone, and they tried birthing new dragons through the Dragonstorms. The newly, freshly wild dragons do exist within the setting, but the original Dragon Lords are gone. No Ujutai, no Selamgar, and similar. It kind of happened in the background and the humans took control again. Ultimately, people are frustrated by this. I don't have a strong opinion on it. It does sound kind of stupid, but ultimately, I'm a little bit checked out of Magic's narrative in general, so I'm just like shrugging. It's like, I guess. I'll wait to see the full collection of the set to get a real vibe check for it, because it might be greater than some of its parts. Baronstorm has Mardu or Abzan on it. If you pick Abzan at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. If you pick Mardu, it becomes a kind of a Grave Pact effect. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control, this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice. Now, of course, it's much worse than either Grave Pact or to take of Erebos, but then again, those cards are a little bit pricier or restrictive in mana and don't have a second mode that's completely different. The reason that Baronstorm Siege isn't as good as that, for example, is because it's got two different things you can do with it. The important thing in assessing this card is that it does both of these things in your end step, so it's not a do-nothing. It's also not an ETB either. You've got to get to your end step before it resolves, so it can be interacted with. I think it's the sweet spot for giving you immediate value, but having your opponent be able to interact with it instead of just being an ETB trigger that does a thing. The Abzan mode, which is the one I think is better of the two, is basically Abzan Ascendancy, or the ETB of Abzan Ascendancy every single turn. It's interesting that we get an Abzan Ascendancy effect that's just not got green in it. It feels weird. Putting counters on your whole team does feel white, I guess, doesn't feel very black, and are more associated with green. But ultimately, I think that's the mode you'll be using this for in Commander. I doubt any sacrifice decks are going to be playing it for the second mode, whilst a lot of counters decks will happily play it for the first mode. And thus, it being modal is kind of borderline pointless. So you never really care about the second mode. I guess if you are a flicker deck with teleportation circles or Thastas or whatever, you might want to flicker the Baronstorm Siege to reset it to a different mode later down the line. So the versatility does give you some play, but ultimately I'm not that impressed with this. I do want to highlight the showcase frame shows the art or depiction of the battle between the Mardu and the Abzan clans as some sort of war map with figurines on it. And not just as a Warhammer nerd do I find this interesting, but I love it when Magic can't depict a different medium or aesthetic in terms of what they're showing us. So in this case, it's an in-canon war map. We often see this on Sieges where it's like reliefs, paintings, stitch work, clothing, etchings and porcelain and pottery and all that jazz. It's just cool to see on a non-saga. I love this kind of stuff. Next up, we have Storm Scale Scion, which is a very splashy, very excited mythic. A 6-mana 4/4 flying dragon that is a Dragon Lord. It's not in literal name, but in its colloquial sense. It gives other dragons +1/+1. That's a colloquialism that we call Lords, if you're into Magic. And it has Storm, which is one of the scariest mechanics Magic's ever had. It's often considered one of the most broken. But again, I mean, to be honest, I'm saying sentences here that were valid 10 years ago. Since then, we've had Companion and other shit that's made Storm look like a baby. Storm was so good, though, originally that it gave rise to the thing called the Storm Scale. Something that Mark Rosewater, one of the lead developers of Magic the Gathering, one of the lead designers, he uses that Storm Scale to denote whether or not a mechanic will come back. If you are a 0 on the Storm Scale, like, I guess, flying, that might not even count because it's evergreen, but flying will come back all the time. It's a 0 on the Storm Scale. Meanwhile, Storm itself, the thing the scale is named after, is usually a 10, and thus will not show up in Standard. it can come back in non-standard formats like Modern Horizons. Here we have a Storm card in Standard. So yes, the Storm scale has been adjusted, and there's a pun. The name is Storm Scale Dragon, obviously referencing the scale itself on the blogs of Mark Rosewater, but in canon being the scales of a dragon being formed within a storm, as the set is called Dragonstorm, a reference to a previous Storm card which allowed you to go and search up dragons. Yes, there are layers upon layers of this, and quite frankly, it's fucking awesome. I fucking love this design and naming convention. It is bordering on, like sort of referential humor that's a little bit derpy. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment with another card in the set, which doesn't do this either. But this is the kind of humor that I can get behind. There's layers of metatextuality with the Mark Rosewater shit. There's layers of metatextuality in terms of previous cards. It's then in canon because the Dragonstorms exist on the plane. Oh, chef's fucking kiss. Anyway, playability, gameplay-wise, interesting card. The point is that if you play a few spells before this, you plot a few spells in Standard, or you cast some rituals in Modern, you will get multiple copies of Stormscale Scion. If you cast 2 rituals, 2 desperate rituals into Stormscale Scion on turn 2, so you pay 2 mana to make 3, you pay 2 of that mana to make 5. Okay, you need 3 rituals to get there, but then you make 4 Stormscale Scions, which are 4/4/4s that give each other +1/+1, and you end up with 4 7/7s. Is that how that works? Either way, it's a lot of fucking power. That is a 4-card combo, but people will most certainly try it. The plot version in Standard seems like it could be strong. Magical Christmas Land is doing off of the Trailblazer. You plot Outcast the Trailblazer on turn 2 off of a Llanowar Elves, for example. Plot another one on turn 3, and then your turn 4 is making 2 Outcast Trailblazers and casting a Stormscale Dragon off of your 4 lands plus the 2 mana that the Trailblazer made, and thus you get yourself 3 Stormscale Scions, the original one plus the 2 Storm copies, you get your 2 Outcast Trailblazers, and you get to draw cards off of the dragons that are coming in, so even if it doesn't kill your opponent, you are drawing up in cards. This is the Christmas Land scenario. Meanwhile, in Modern, or even Legacy, needs to be compared to Empty the Warrens, a 4-mana Storm card that gives you 2 Goblin tokens. Now, I think that Stormscale Scions could be as good as Empty the Warrens sometimes, but it's probably just worse. The obvious thing is that you can empty the Warrens for 4 mana, so a few rituals and you're off to the races, and you aren't trying to get up to that magical 6 number. If you go like ritual, empty the Warrens, you make 6 1/1s, and 6 1/1s is still 6 damage. That's a multi-turn clock of bodies that sometimes your opponent can play a blocker and stabilize against. Of course, with empty the Warrens, you usually want to make a ton of tokens, but sometimes you're up against the wire in, say, Legacy, for example. You just make as many goblins as you can early and hope it rides you to victory. Meanwhile, if you just do 2 or 3 rituals into Stormscale Scion, you're going to have enough to kill your opponent on 2 turns or 1 turn, just because of the sheer size of the creature that you're making. However, one of the upsides to Empty the Warrens is that it's not soft to 1 or 2 removal spells. If your opponent has a Fatal Push and a Swords to Plowshares in hand, or some combination of 1 mana removal spells, killing 2 goblins is only a small portion lost of the overall output. Meanwhile, 1 Fatal Push does decrease your Stormscale Scion output by a significant margin, but the flip side of that is that it flies, and you can't just play a 2/2 or 2/1 Thalia on turn 2 and hope that can block down enough goblins to stabilize. What I'm saying is, Empty the Warrens is often better, but there are plenty of situations where Stormscale Scions can replace Empty the Warrens as a more expensive but harder to block and stabilize against version of the aforementioned Warren Storm combo. The point to remember about this, though, is that Empty the Warrens isn't really played all that much. It is still a sideboard card in some versions of Storm, but none of them are really dominating any formats right now. If we look simply to the last version of Ruby Storm to win a Modern challenge, the deck actually has 0 copies of Empty the Warrens across its main deck or sideboard. It used to be that sometimes you would sideboard into Empty the Warrens to fire it off early, make some bodies, and just beat your opponent down when they've sideboarded into cards to stop you from grape shotting or to hinder your ability to play multiple spells a turn. But yeah, Ruby Storm doesn't do that anymore. It just looks to grape shot you or transform its sideboard into casting Flages and stuff like that. So really, I'm comparing it to a card that is largely fallen out of favor in older formats. I did find a version of Legacy Belcher piloted to a top 32 finish by Tony Scapone, who's playing an Empty the Warrens in their main deck. This is like a pivotable option for the Belcher deck if they can't Belcher you. So it does see an absolute fringe amount of play, but again, I just don't know if a 6-mana creature version of that is going to bring that to the forefront. Either way, as you can tell from all the talking I'm doing about it, this card is exciting and fun and interesting This is gas. On the note of intercontextuality and reference for your own legacy, here is Skirmish Rhino. This is Siege Rhino if it had a smaller penis. It costs 1 less mana, it's got 1 less toughness, 1 less power, 1 less life loss, and 1 less life gain, but it is a trampling 3/4 for 3 mana that shoots your opponent for 2 and gains you 2. This is pretty fucking cool. Again, it's the kind of reference that I can get behind. Instead of it being an obscure or fan favorite legendary wearing a hat appropriate to the current plane, or perhaps, let's talk about Hull Drifter for a second. I don't mind this pun. I think this pun is pretty fun. It is a car version of Mole Drifter, right? It's a vehicle version of Mole Drifter, a 5 mana flying creature that's a 2/2 or whatever, that draws you 2 cards. Absolutely fine. But Hull Drifter feels more slapstick and more silly than Mole Drifter does, or Skirmish Rhino does. Skirmish Rhino is a reference that we can look at and we can smile and we can find fun, whilst also not thinking that the game doesn't take itself seriously enough, which is a problem that Magic kind of has at the moment. A little bit of levity is fine, but Magic seems to be just indulging in it non-stop. Beyond that, Skirmish Rhino also asks us to think about things like, what would a 2 mana or a 1 mana Rhino look like? How would they do that with the 3 colors in it? What would a 5 mana, a mythic or a legendary version of the Rhino look like? I love those questions. I love that. Will this card see any play? Probably not, but it being 3 mana does introduce some interesting things. You can collect a company into it. You can Aether Violet in play off of a 3-drop Aether Violet, which is a good spot to have Violet in some decks. You can Sun Titan it back in other formats too, and it does give you access to both Skirmish Rhino and Siege Rhino if you want to play 8 Rhino or 12 to 32 Rhinos, depending on how many clones you fit into your deck. This is a fun bit of design, even if it doesn't dominate any formats anywhere. I just love that this exists. This, and like the Storm Scale Dragon and stuff, makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside about Magic. This is fucking Magic, kids. And then we got a fan favorite coming back. It's Sarkhan, and he's not wearing a fucking hat. Praise be to the Dragon Lords of Tarkir. He is the Dragon Ascendant, a 2 mana, 2/2 human druid. And when he enters, you may behold a dragon. If you do, create a treasure token. Behold being one of the new mechanics. So with behold, you have to reveal a dragon from hand or point to a dragon you have in play. You have to choose a dragon. So when you behold something, at least initially, we're all going to do this, aren't we? We're going to go, behold a dragon. And it'll get old and we'll get bored of it and we'll start to cringe at it eventually. But for the first day or so, for the pre-release, it'll be fun. And then we'll stop. Behold being a mechanic that is interesting because they can open up to other things later on. Behold an artifact, behold a saproling, behold a dick. They can do all sorts of stuff with it, which is a great place to take a mechanic in Magic because you can use it again for some interesting stuff. Whenever a dragon you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Sarkhan. Until end of turn, Sarkhan becomes a dragon in addition to its other types and gains flying. And thus, as you curve out dragons, he gets bigger and he flies and he becomes a dragon himself, which is pretty decent in terms of having a dragon aggro plan. Now, there are a handful of 3 mana dragons. There's one particular one in standard that pings the opponent when you play a non-spell or dragon, if I remember correctly. I'll have it on screen now. So you can curve out into that. And I can guarantee there will be smaller dragons in the set as well, because they're going to obviously support dragon as an archetype here. Also, it wouldn't surprise me if when we get back to Lauren, which is the beginning of next year in 2026, because it got pushed back to make room for Universes Beyond, we will get Changeling again. Changeling being a creature type or keyword on Shapeshifter creature type, should I say, that makes the creature all types, and thus will have dragons at all mana costs. So if Sarkhan doesn't find a home right now in current standard, and he won't find much of a home in a dragon deck unless you want to play him as the mono-red Sarkhan commander, doesn't seem very exciting. But either way, he will find a home later, I'm almost sure of it. On that note, let's talk about a card that I think is absolutely dog shit. Mox Jasper evokes the Moxen of old, and that is exciting. Whenever they print a Mox, it's a cool and interesting thing, because Moxes are broken. 5 of them are in the power 9. They are cheap, normally 0, or always 0, should I say, mana rocks. Now, there's been some attempts to make them in the past that have been good or bad. Mox Opal has gone in and out of being banned in certain formats, currently unbanned in Modern and causing some problems. Mox Amber was quite bad, but ended up being part of certain combo decks. Mox Tantalite never really found a home. Mox Jasper says you have to control a dragon to make a mana of any color, and thus it being a free mana rock will not accelerate you early because your dragons are usually expensive. Even Sarkhan that we just looked at requires you to play another dragon to trigger and make him a dragon to turn your Mox Jasper on to make it mana rock usable. So it's just bad in some sort of dragon archetype constructed. In Commander, your Dragon Commander will be 5 mana or more, and thus having a Mox Jasper in play will be a dead mana rock, doesn't do anything unless you're playing Changelings, which is the one place that I could see this seeing some amount of play, where you play like the one that Ninjas plays. This one on screen, Outcast something, and that would enable the Mox Jasper. Other places you could see Mox Jasper seeing play is if your commander is a dragon, and it draws you lots of cards. Corvold, you can often sack a load of shit to a sack outlet and just draw a ton of cards. And in that case, you want to be able to do things with the cards you've drawn on the turn that you're trying to go off, right? Drawing into mana rocks that allow you to cast spells is that. And Mox Jasper allows you to do that off of Corvold as a specific example. Your average Dragon Commander is going to find this bad, but if it draws loads of cards, it's pretty decent. Which is interesting because like this mana rock will be dog shit in the majority of Commander decks, but then it is a fast mana piece in certain builds. You know, draw a lot of cards, Corvold. So that begs the question, where does this fit into the bracket system? Is this truly fast mana, or is it derpy bad mana that bad Dragon decks are going to play, and it's going to be 80% of the time turned off? I don't know. You can tell me in the comment section below. Smiles at Death is a 5 mana enchantment in white that says at the beginning of your upkeep, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures. This is referencing the classic Alesha, who I believe is now dead in canon. Even Zerga is there in the flavor text playing homage to Alesha, the old leading Khan of Mardu. Or at some point. I'm not even 100% sure if she led. It's confusing. First of all, it doesn't do anything on your turn. You've got to get to your next upkeep. So in Commander, you're playing this and passing around the table, hoping no one interacts with it. You also need to have things in the bin that it matters for, but like anything of power 2 or less. This includes the new Cactar creature. If you are in a colors that allow you to play it, you can reanimate that with this and put some counters on it, so you can hit someone for 10,002 damage or 10,001 damage. That's pretty neat. More importantly, it hits 2 things, and thus you can get like Anna Fenza and a Murderous Redcap, or Anna Fenza and a Kitchen Finks, and then you're just 1 sack outlet away from having infinite life or infinite damage. And thus getting 2 things for the value of 1 card is not only a value proposition, but also an easy way to combo out of your bin, even though you have to jump through hoops to get those things into the bin in the first place. The effect is very, very powerful, hence why it's a mythic, but it's on a 5 mana enchantment that does nothing until you get to your turn. So yeah, the ceiling is high, but the floor is so fucking high, low too. It can just literally do absolutely shit all. Interesting card, not that exciting in my opinion, but I could see myself playing it in some Commander decks. We've got what I first wanted to call the new iteration of Crackling Doom, but in reality it's more like Utter End. If Utter End cost 1 more red mana, not 1 more mana in general, so they're both 4 mana, but if you added red to Utter End, what do you get? Well, it can no longer be countered, and it has a Lightning Helix strapped to it that only hits players. So you exile target non-land permanent, it can't be countered, its controller loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. This is a lot of text on a 4 mana spell. Now, I think people are like just not that excited by this because it's just some damage and a removal spell, and that isn't as splashy as a Storm Dragon or a Gnar set or an enchantment that references a dead fan favorite. But in reality, this card is pretty fucking nuts. It is instant speed, it cannot be countered, it hits everything but lands, and has just some life loss and life gain strapped onto it. I think Utter End is absolutely playable in Contemporary Commander, no matter what other content creators talk about when it comes to 4 mana removal spells. This card is absolutely solid at your middle to even lower higher tier like power levels. Inevitable Defeat is just an upgrade to that if you can cast it. This card is really good, and I can see myself playing it in a couple of decks. Also, AC get 60 card constructed play in Standard, has maybe a 1 or 2 off depending on where decks land. Shiko, Paragon of the Way, is a 5 mana 4/5 flying vigilant creature that when it enters the battlefield, it exiles target non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. You copy it and you cast that copy without paying its mana cost. This is if Sun Tie-In and fucking Snapcaster Mage had a baby by doing the sex. This card is really good. Now, it doesn't have flash. That's an important point. Like I mentioned Snapcaster Mage, but one of the reasons that Snapcaster Mage is good is that it's not sorcery speed. You can do it on your opponent's turn, you can use cantrips and counter magic off of it. So it's very important that it doesn't do that. It actually brings its power level quite significantly down. It's not comparable to like the amount of differential Gearhulk has seen across Pioneer and Standard in the past. But it is a 4/5 flying vigilant body. Flying vigilance is a hell of a combo for being a thing that turns off people's aggros and allows you to clock your opponent in 60 card constructed. It has an ETB effect, so even when removed, you've still got a trigger that will do something pretty decent. Mana value 3 or less. This can be a cantrip, this can be a removal spell, this can be a 3 mana creature or a rock. The options are endless. Well, no, they're not endless. It's however many non-land spells exist in Magic that are mana value 3 or less, I guess, and then how many targets they can hit. So it's not quite endless. I think this card has a good chance of being a player in Standard. I just wonder if it's not good enough in the current version of Standard, where mice are prowessing the ever-loving shit out of each other, and easy answers to this exist for the low cost of 1 mana with Leyland's Binding and such. I'm just wondering if the power level is so high right now that this won't see that amount of play, because 5 mana for a 4/5 flying vigilant creature with some upside isn't quite where a lot of decks want to be at. However, I cannot imagine that there won't be a time when things rotate out, and this has a little bit of time in the sun. So if this doesn't see play immediately, I can see it seeing play later down the line. As for Commander, it does only have one ETB trigger, and that just seems like nothing in today's economy of how many actions and effects can I get out of my Commander. You want it every single turn. You want it on attack. You want a trigger when you do things. This is a one-time dealio. So really, if you're playing a Flicker deck, perhaps in Just Go Colors, this is absolutely fine, including the 99 for a solid body that does a cool thing when you flicker it. But ultimately, I don't see a lot of people building this as a Commander because it just doesn't do enough. Not because what it doesn't do is good, but because everything else is doing so much more in Commander. Speaking of which, let's look at some of the Spirit Dragons from Commander instead. Bator, the Ancestor's Voice, is a 5-mana Abzan legendary creature Spirit Dragon 3/5 flying lifelink. That's right, a 3/5 flying lifelinker. Not bad. Beginning of your end step, put a number +1/+1 counters on up to one other target creature you control equal to the amount of life you gain this turn. So if you hit someone with the lifelinking part of this creature, you have to put 3 counters on another creature that isn't Bator. Return up to one target creature card with mana value less than or equals to the amount of life you lost this turn from your graveyard to the battlefield. Oh wow, that is an effect. So in essence, you want to find ways to be able to pay life so you can sculpt the amount of life you've lost to trigger and bring back creatures from your bin at the end of turn. So lots of stuff going on here. The card does so much more than Shiko that I just mentioned. It cares about life loss, it cares about life gain, it does the life gaining, it's a creature body itself, it pumps a large creature to be bigger, and it returns stuff. So in essence, it plays quite well with a lot of the like sort of bat stuff that we saw in Bloomburrow, where they care about life loss, life gain. So there's like some sort of mechanical through lines there that are very much on purpose because they're all coming out in around about the same time. Again, this is not going to be standard legal because it's a Commander card, but I do like the fact that this does like multiple things. It does a lot, which is maybe one of the criticisms of modern design, but it does a lot of quite varied things. I think that's fun and interesting. Also, big flyers are rare in green. Dragons have tended to break that cycle in recent time. This is a bit smaller than the other dragons, probably for that reason. How about a black, green, blue 4-mana 4/4 flyer? This one is Teval, the Balance Scale, a spirit dragon with flying and no other keyword. Whenever it attacks, you mill 3 cards and you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. Oh baby, that's some exciting second text there. So on attack, you will trigger and mill 3 cards and hopefully hit a land, put the land back in your hand and make a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. Now, if anyone has played the Roots deck in current standard or tried to play it in other formats like Pioneer, you will realize this is a very similar effect. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, Roots obviously cares about creatures, but this cares about any card. So at any point that you exile a thing from your bin with a Deathrite Shaman or a Mulch Tender, or if you recur things with Eternal Witness or Crucible of Worlds, anything like that is going to make you a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. Hell, you can shuffle your graveyard back into your library, you can exile things to delve effects to play a Tasiga. There are a million different ways to move things from your graveyard to your hand. If you mill, pick a card and put it back into your hand, like with the recent Dredge's Insight from Aetherdrift, that's the same effect again. There are so many ways to trigger this and make 2/2 black zombies, but this is a very fun commander to build around, and is currently my pick from the set for one I think I will build. I just don't have a deck that looks like this in my current collection of decks. Again, it sort of enables the thing, does the thing, gives you the payoff for the thing, but that's just modern card design, baby. It's why I said that Shiko is so underwhelming compared to what you'll see with the other dragons or Commander dragons or other mythic legendaries in the current age of Magic. Are you excited for Tarkir? I think these cards look sick. I think there are some sweet designs here. I think the power level is looking a bit lower than what we've seen with Dustmourne and similar, but it's early days. Saying the cards are bad in a set that you've only seen like 6 cards from is very silly, but that won't stop people saying that in the comment section below. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Be good to one another. Pre-order from Cool Stuff Inc. in North America or magicmadhouse.co.uk in the Europes, and I'll see you in the next one, bitches. Ta for now.